let's talk about hype. We've all been there. Folks on stage trying to sell a snake oil that looks like it would change the industry forever, only to kind of fizzle out and be forgotten about. Or in some recent cases, they crash and burn so hard, they have to wonder what went wrong. The hype train can absolutely be a fun ride, don't get me wrong. But when it crashes, oh man, does it crash. Of course, this is all subjective, you know? Like, I was really excited for the Final Fantasy VII remake and ended up being really disappointed by it, but my good friend King K loves that game. The level of excitement that you feel during a game's pre-release period and whether or not it lived up to your expectations, that kind of experience is going to be different for everybody, and each person is going to react differently. But what happens when you're riding that hype train and it actually, you know, it doesn't crash? What if you were really excited for a game and it delivered? What if it's even better than you were expecting? Well, folks, today we're going to be talking about such a game. Let's go all the way back to E3 2004, arguably one of Nintendo's best showings, with the likes of Resident Evil 4, the Nintendo DS showing off a new Metroid Prime title and a fully fledged remake of Mario 64, and of course, one of the greatest reveals in E3's history. This was not how I was introduced to the game. One of my sister's friends came over to our place when we were kids and introduced us to this weird little website called YouTube. I don't know if you've ever heard about it. It's kind of an underground thing, but anyways. And I found out about this game by a fan-made music video where they took clips from this trailer and spliced it with Linkin Park music. Ugh. It was a much simpler time back then. But man, I remember getting so pumped for this game. Like a brand spanking new Zelda game with cutting edge graphics. It looks like it's going to have a more mature story than the Wind Waker. Like, this is going to be awesome. Whenever a new trailer dropped, I would watch it over and over again. And whenever Game Informer had a spotlight on it, you bet your ass I would read that shit and stare at the pictures, you know, examining every single detail. And when the game finally came out, it did it. The train didn't crash, you know, it didn't disappoint. For the most part, anyways. Like, I was a little bummed out to see that some of the cool looking stuff in the previous trailers not make it into the base game. Like, for one reason or another, like things like the giant enemy spider that chases you around, or the moblin enemies, or this early concept for a fire temple, they weren't in the base game. So this actually had me really interested in all the cut content in this game and what happened during this game's development, and it's actually kind of sad. The team, after releasing Wind Waker, was already getting started on making a sequel to that game, but the higher-ups at Nintendo noticed, however, that the sales for the Wind Waker were pretty disappointing. The Wind Waker sold roughly around 4.6 million units in total, which doesn't sound that bad, but then when you compare it to something like Ocarina of Time, you know, a game that sold over 7 million units, yeah, that's kind of a big drop. Honestly, these numbers could be due to a number of things. The first thing that comes to mind is the fact that the GameCube didn't exactly sell very well, but the higher-ups pointed the finger at the Wind Waker's cartoony art style. It's the thing that the fans were most vocal about, and this was the generation that started to push games towards looking more realistic and more mature. So rather than continuing the story of the Wind Waker on a console, like originally planned, they scrapped that idea in favor of something more crowd-pleasing. Fans wanted a darker, more mature look for the next Zelda game, and Nintendo delivered and was received very, well, you know. Maybe it was the more realistic art style that helped, or maybe it was the fact that this game acted as the swan song for the GameCube and a launch title for the Wii, one of Nintendo's best-selling systems. But this game doubled the sales of the Wind Waker at a whopping 8.8 million units sold, becoming the best-selling Zelda game for years, up until Breath of the Wild came out and took that crown with 20 million units. 20 million units! Christ on a bun, that is a lot. This game came out and it was praised to high heaven, with folks calling it one of the best Zelda games ever made that rivals Ocarina of Time. Nowadays, a lot of people find this game to be kind of boring and derivative, saying that its similarities to Ocarina of Time make the game feel uninspired and even soulless. I loved this game when I was a kid, but you know, it's been a few years since I've actually sat down and played through the entire game. You know, it's funny too, because like this game got an HD port on the Wii U, but I never felt compelled to play it. I sure as hell bought it, but I never touched it. So how does this game stack up? Is it as good as I remembered? Buckle up, fellas, because this one is going to be kind of a long one. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess is such a cool fucking game, dude. Like, oh my god, coming back to this game was a real treat. It was like eating at a restaurant that you haven't been to in years and finding out that the food is still as good, if not better, than you remembered. Now, maybe it's because I've been starving for a more, let's say, traditional 3D Zelda game ever since Breath of the Wild. Now, sure, I covered the previous 3 Zelda games already, but 2 of those games I played through like a million times, and the other one I didn't really care for that much. Playing through this game with a fine-tooth comb was so satisfying. Exploring Hyrule and finding all sorts of secret areas and running through these dungeons and getting lost with all the side content that there is to do in this game. There's a reason why this video took so long for me to make, okay? Also, despite working retail during the holiday season with the global pandemic, you know, there's that too, but, you know, also the fact that I was stuck on this game, like, it's so fucking good. I guess the best place for me to start would be to talk about the visuals of this game, seeing how this is what fans reacted to the loudest when this game was first revealed. It's a God-given fact that the more you try to push your games towards looking more realistic, the faster it's going to age. Graphically speaking, something like The Wind Waker or Super Mario Sunshine holds up a lot better than Twilight Princess, but I feel that for the time, this game looked really good. I remember being shocked at even the smallest details that nowadays we take for granted, like when Link gets wet, his tunic gets all damp. Even the design for Link is something that I really like too, and it's something you could tell they put a lot of thought into when designing the character. The tunic itself has like a lot of rips and tears that were sewn in, you know, you got chainmail underneath the tunic to provide defense, you know, and Link isn't wearing tights anymore, but now like a thin cloth-like garment. You know, this is actually my favorite design for the character, believe it or not. To me, like, this is a tunic that looks like it really was passed down from generation to generation. You know, the detail in the tunic tells a story, and I think that makes for a great character design. Actually, this art style is my favorite in the series so far. Now, when I say art style, I don't exactly mean the way how this game looks in-game. For my money, I think the remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the 3DS are my favorites in terms of how they look in-game. But the art that they made for Twilight Princess is some really great stuff. The game itself has more realistic textures and colors and lighting, but the character designs are still a bit more stylized than you might expect. So while the game does look dated in some places, there were still plenty of times when I was playing the game that I thought the game looked really good. It's aged, sure, but I still think it holds up a lot better than most people give it credit for. Some people say that some of the human characters clash with the more realistic art style, and with some of the NPCs in Ordon Village, you know, you also got the clowns in Lake Hylia, Mallow. Yeah, you know, I'll definitely agree that they look weird and out of place, but I do think that everyone else looks consistent. Also, let's get this out of the way right now. Like, why do people think this game is edgy or moody? Like, this is Jak 2 or Shadow the Hedgehog or something. Like, people say this version of Link is emo, but I'm like, what are you on about, dude? Like, he's a role model for the kids in his village, and he does what he can to look out for them and to protect them. Now, sure, sometimes when he tries to express emotions, it can come off as a little, oh yeah, that is not good. But I find that a lot of his expressions are a lot more subtle, and again, the fact that they were able to pull off this kind of animation, given the GameCube being, you know, the GameCube, I can't help but feel impressed by it. Not once did I ever get the impression that Link was being edgy or try-hard. Like, I always saw him as the good-hearted farm boy that everyone can depend on. You know, he's not trying to kill the King of Hyrule, or, you know, he's not leading an army of space aliens to invade the Earth, or some nonsense like that. He's just a humble man from a small village, just trying to do the right thing. And for that, this is actually my favorite incarnation of the hero. Now, while I don't think Link is an edgy, try-hard son of a bitch, or that this game is some dated, moody piece of garbage from, you know, the 2000s, I feel as if the story itself tries a little too hard to be dark or unsettling. Like, in some spots, I think it's effective. Like, I remember when I saw the Zora's Frozen in Zora's Domain, like, that legitimately freaked me out, even on my most recent playthrough. But there's also a lot of points in the game where it makes scary faces and goes, ooga booga, you know? Like, there's a scene where the history of the Triforce and the Twilight is being explained to Link. Like, does anyone have any idea what's going on here? Like, what the hell is this? I don't know. Like, I like a lot of what they were trying to do, but the execution feels off. Like, when Midna feels dark temptations of the Forbidden Shadows, I should not be laughing when Midna makes this face, but I am laughing like a goddamn idiot. Now, in terms of what happens in the story itself, well, let's get into it, and if I get anything wrong, feel free to let me know. We all know how the land of Hyrule was created, how the 3 golden goddesses used their power to create the land, the law, and the creatures to uphold that law, and then combined to form the Triforce. In the previous Zelda games, it's said that entire wars have been waged in hopes of finding the sacred realm, where the Triforce is hidden, so that they can have whatever the heart wishes to be granted. As it turns out, there was once this tribe who practiced in dark magic that tried to use their magic to obtain the Triforce, but was banished to a realm that is neither darkness nor light, but some in-between realm. being the realm of Twilight. A young, impressionable creature, Zant, attempted and failed at becoming the ruler of the Twilight. As he threw a tantrum, a dark force appeared in front of him and gave him near limitless power. Power from none other than the man named Ganondorf. If you remember the ending of Ocarina of Time, the timeline split down into two paths. Technically three, but for the sake of this retrospective, there's only two that matters. One that picks up from where Zelda sends Link back in time, and the other following Link as a child. Link put back the Master Sword and found his way to Princess Zelda to warn of Ganondorf's plan to overthrow the kingdom, and in time, Ganondorf was sentenced to be executed. We get to see how this execution plays out, and as it turns out, it doesn't end very well. The sages used their power to banish Ganondorf into the Twilight Realm, kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, but little did they know that this one mistake would lead to chaos. Ganondorf gave his power to Zant, and he used that power to usurp the Kingdom of Twilight. He then took his forces from beyond the Twilight Realm and into Hyrule itself, plummeting the entire country into this realm of Twilight. As all of this is happening, as the world is seemingly coming to its end, there's a village all the way down south of Hyrule that has yet to feel the effects of the Twilight, where the people live unaware of what's going on outside. This is where the game begins, in the remote village of Ordon. Our hero, Link, lives a simple life. He's a rancher who helps herd goats and fishes and entertains the children, acting as a role model of sorts. He even has like a thing for a girl, and she kind of has a thing for him. It's a cute little romance. But in time, the corruption of the Twilight catches up to the Faron province, thrusting our hero onto his journey. He's dragged into the Twilight Realm, and with the blessing of the gods of courage, he's transformed into the sacred beast. Link collapses and is thrown into a cell in Hyrule Castle. This is where we are introduced to one of the greatest companions in Zelda history, Midna. She breaks us out and guides us to the imprisoned Princess Zelda, and she gets Link up to speed as to what's happened. Now it's up to Midna and Link to push back against the Twilight and reclaim the land in the name of the light. Or something like that. Honestly, I added a bit of flavor text to make the story sound a bit more interesting. I think the plot of Twilight Princess has a lot of really cool ideas, but on the whole, it's pretty disappointing for a number of reasons. For starters, and I know I've already said this, but this game doesn't try to be edgy or moody, but there are a couple of points where it does try to be creepy or unsettling, and more often than not, it does fall flat. Again, there's those two examples that I brought up before, but, there are points that I think it does pull off that creepy vibe pretty well. There's this one part in the game where you come across Kakariko Village, and you find the missing children of the Ordon village hiding from the monsters of Twilight, and Barnes, one of the people who's been looking after the children, is freaking out. He tells the story about how these monsters attacked the lady who ran the general store, and how a bunch of people went after the monsters to go save her, but then when they encountered the monsters, even more showed up and took everyone out, and the lady from the general store, she's dead. She got offed. This explains why Kakariko Village this time around is so barren and empty. See, that's pretty messed up, and that's effective. There's this other part involving the Queen of the Zora tribe. When the Twilight invaded Zora's domain, they executed the Queen in front of everybody just to make an example. That's effective, and it tells us why the Twilight are a threat. Now, sure, you go into Hyrule Castle Town while the city's still under Twilight, the people are seemingly unaware of what's going on. But just about everywhere else that you go, the ramifications are clear. And with these examples, the game is unsettling, absolutely. The second issue that I have is the lack of characters. Now, sure, there's a lot of people that you meet along your journey, but very few actually do anything. I like Telma, I like Barnes, I like the people in Kakariko Village, they're a nice little group of people, but then you find out about this group of people who are trying to figure out what's been going on in Hyrule, and I think the game is trying to make me like these people, but, I don't. They don't ever do anything. They show up in an area, they say something weird is going on, and then you end up discovering what's going on yourself. These people, while it is a really cool idea, are useless and have no character whatsoever. The real star of the show is Midna. She's really the only character, if not one of the very, very few, who has any sort of motivation or goal whatsoever. It helps that she has a very sarcastic, standoff personality, which keeps things interesting. Really, she's the main character of this game. It's more like she's the main character and Link is the side companion, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, the game is called The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, so it's kind of implied that the princess of said Twilight would be the star of the show, And that's another thing too, is that there's this point where Midna is revealed to be the princess of the Twilight tribe, but I don't know, I always thought it was kind of obvious. Now, while her character arc isn't anything original, it's still satisfying to see her go through this one, nonetheless. Now, at first, she doesn't really care about saving Hyrule from the Twilight. She just wants to take back her throne from Zant. But in a twist, the plot MacGuffins that we've been looking for turn out to be useless against Zant, and he turns Link back into a beast and almost kills Midna, leading to one of the most memorable moments in the game. We've been completely and hopelessly defeated, and all we can do now is to find Princess Zelda to see if she can do something, anything. When we go into Hyrule Castle Town, people run in fear. We get tossed out of Telma's bar in the rain. This sucks. but then we get help from Tilma's cat, and with their help, we can get back inside Hyrule Castle. Zelda then gives Midna her remaining life force and heals Midna completely. Moved by Zelda's selflessness, she decides that she wants to help save the people of Hyrule. Again, it's not exactly original, but it is satisfying. So while the story, I feel anyways, is kind of underwhelming, the ride that the game puts you on is really fun, if that makes any sense. I think in terms of the pacing of the story, I find it to be very effective. There's always something interesting happening, and you get to do a lot of really cool stuff. You get to do things like dueling with King Boblin and chasing him around in Hyrule Field, or escorting a sick Zora prince and defending the cargo from monsters, or snowboarding down a mountain and finding a ruined mansion. Like, the game is packed to the brim with this kind of stuff. But it kind of feels as if the people who were coming up with the ideas for this game, it feels like as if they came up with the ideas first, and then sloppily used the plot to string these events together. So again, while the narrative wasn't exactly that interesting for me, I can't say that I was ever bored by it thanks to the variety of ways that it kept my attention. Now, one thing that I can't fault people for criticizing, however, is the structure of the game. This game is formulaic to a T. It follows that Zelda formula of finding the 3 MacGuffins, getting the Master Sword, doing late game dungeons, and then taking down Ganon. However, Twilight Princess adds a few arguably unneeded steps in this formula. So in the first half of the game, before you enter the dungeon of each region, you must first explore the region while it's in Twilight as a wolf and find a set amount of tears to push back against the Twilight. Then you have to do something involving the story, like the duel with King Boblin or escorting the sick Zora prince like I mentioned before. Then you can go inside the dungeon. I mean, even at the beginning of the game, it's going to take you a good while until you can even step foot inside the first dungeon. Now, here's the thing. I could understand why people don't like this and consider this to be padding. In the case of finding the tears in each region, yeah, you're essentially doing the same thing over and over again, and it does come off as padding. It also doesn't help that the wolf transformation isn't as fleshed out as it could have been, but we'll get there later on in the video. And it also doesn't help that in the second half of the game, the padding is laid on extra thick. Getting to the City of the Sky is going to have you do a lot of unnecessary stuff. Like, a lot of that stuff that you do in Twilight Princess is stuff that I actually enjoy doing. See, the thing is that the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess share a very similar structure, and on paper, they have very similar problems. That being the amount of busy work they have to do before entering a dungeon. The thing is that doing busy work in Twilight Princess looks like this. And busy work in the Wind Waker looks like this. Do you see the difference here? Again, with Twilight Princess, I'm always doing something, so I'm always engaged. Even if it's something that I don't enjoy doing as much as other things, this game still has a firm grip on my attention. I was never bored, unlike in the Wind Waker where there came multiple points where I just wanted the game to end. Sure, at the end of the day, it is busy work, but if I'm having fun doing what I'm doing, then what's the problem? Also, as per 3D Zelda tradition, there is the obligatory stealth section, where if you get caught, some mooks run at you and you can take them out with the sword. Easy peasy. Like, thank God, man. Like, in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, I didn't mind the stealth sections in those games so much because, you had some means of defending yourself, with the bow and arrow in Ocarina of Time or the stone mask in Majora's Mask. But, like, when I would get caught, I don't know why Link would just let himself get thrown out, Like, I'd always think, like, why can't I take him on? But in Twilight Princess, you can do exactly that. Now, sure, you can take the sneaky route, but fuck that. Fuck stealth, it sucks. If I remember right, during the Hidden Village raid, you're told to play it more stealthy, but, like, no. Like, it's more fun to run in bows ablazing. And the music that plays here, like, it makes me feel like a lone cowboy trying to take back his town or something. Oh man, that's something else too. Like, the music in this game is some top-notch stuff. It's not my favorite soundtrack in this series, but it's still very good. Twilight Princess, as you could have guessed, goes for a more epic and at times more cinematic score, and it works very well. It even does that thing that Ocarina of Time does when you're standing in Hyrule Field. Like, depending on what you're doing, the tone of the piece will change. On top of that, while you're riding around on Epona, more instruments are added, making this my favorite rendition of Hyrule Field. And speaking of Hyrule Field, this is actually my favorite version of Hyrule. Now, first of all, now this might sound a little shallow, but I just love how this place looks. I think this game looks at its best when exploring Hyrule. You know, there's so much to explore here. People argue that it's just a whole lot of nothing, but that just frankly isn't true. There's two major collectibles in this game. The first being the heart pieces, which this time around you need about 5 pieces in order to make a heart container. There's about 45 pieces in total this time. But then you also have the golden bugs to look for. There's 2 of each bug, a male and a female, and they're generally in the same area. So if you're exploring Hyrule and you find a golden male beetle, the female won't be too far off, for example. If you gather all of the bugs and give them to Agatha, she rewards you with the Giant's Wallet, allowing you to carry up to 1,000 rupees, which is pretty useful seeing how there's going to be a lot of rupees to be found here, arguably to this game's detriment. In games like this, you know, money isn't ever a fun reward. You know, I'd rather find something cool like a new item or a new magic spell or something. You know, and it's kind of weird and also sad that Twilight Princess doesn't have the magic meter, you know, despite this game showing off a magic meter on the back of the box. Okay, so, you know, here I am minding my own business. I'm editing the Twilight Princess video. Pretty good stuff, pretty good stuff. You're watching it now. I hope you're enjoying it. Check this out, okay? Twilight Princess on GameCube. That's the version I originally played when I was just a wee little lad. You know, look on the back of the box. Huh, look at this. Nothing seems too far out of the ordinary. Oh, that looks really interesting. It looks like a good game. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Check this shit out. Twilight Princess on Wii, right? Look at the back of the box. Biggest Zelda adventure of all time. 16 by 9. And there's a magic meter on the back of the box. That's not in the final product. I'm suing Nintendo. Ugh! In this game, it's more annoying than anything when you find a chest with rupees in it, because if you can't carry any more money, Link will just put the money back in the chest. Now, in a weird way, I could understand why some people may say this is a good thing, because it just means that money isn't being thrown into the void. You can come back and pick up the chest when you need the money, but like, I'm not going to go back all the way to a significant part of the dungeon just to get like 20 rupees, when I could easily find that by killing mooks or breaking pots. But with that being said, you know, I remember money being kind of useless in this game, but coming back and playing this game again, I found that wasn't the case. Like, I was spending money on mini games, and you know, I was spending money to find hits on the next heart piece, or donating money to this weirdo. You know, there's quite a bit to spend it on, not gonna lie. And need I even mention the magic armor? Now, first of all, you know, the quest to getting this thing is something else, and it's another rupee sink, or with having to donate rupees multiple times to open up the Malamart and Castletown. But getting the magic armor makes it so that you don't lose health when you take damage, but you lose rupees instead. So, at least in my playthrough, rupees were always being used. So, I don't know how we got to talking about the magic armor from talking about Hyrule Field, but hey, I mean, that's just a Hyrule video for you, I guess. In Hyrule Field, you know, there's so many secret areas littered throughout every section, and each section has something worth exploring. And I think it's really interesting how the first section of Hyrule that you explore is roughly about the same size as Hyrule Field and Ocarina of Time. But the more you play, the more the map expands, and it really does show you how far we've come since 1998. Hyrule Field is huge this time around, but what I like the most about Hyrule Field is how Hyrule Castle is at the center of the map, meaning that just about everywhere that you go, you will see Hyrule Castle. And in the second half of the game, it acts as a constant reminder of why you're doing what you're doing, and I think that's really interesting. Thankfully, getting around Hyrule is pretty easy this time around, thanks to a much more useful fast travel system that covers every region, but Epona herself being much faster and more practical than ever before. Horseback riding was always a part of this game's marketing, so it was important that this aspect of the game was fun, and thankfully it is. Controlling Epona is tight and responsive, and this was the game that introduced Horseback Combat. Apparently, this is something that they wanted to do at some point during Ocarina of Time's development, but couldn't do it due to hardware limitations and time restraints, and also the fact that Hyrule Field in that game had, like, no enemies. Like, Epona and horseback riding didn't really feel all that important in Ocarina of Time, and that's why I didn't really talk about it that much in that video. This is a mechanic that you learn at the very beginning of the game. Link's a farm boy, so of course he's going to have a horse, and I also think it's really cute how you can name this horse this time around. Epona isn't a prize to be won. She's your horse, and it feels more special that way. Like, there's a bond here that wasn't in Ocarina of Time, and I appreciate that. My biggest complaint with Epona is that you don't have a reliable means of calling her until around the end of the game. You get this charm that lets you call her from anywhere, but until then, you have to use these horseshoe flower things to call her, and that's pretty annoying. Either way, using Epona to explore every nook and cranny that Hyrule has to offer was a lot of fun for me. Like, I've never 100% completed Twilight Princess before this video, yet it felt so seamless. Like, there's 45 heart containers to get in the game, yet there weren't any that felt like a pain in the ass to get. Even some of the mini games this time around are fun, like this one where you have to use the claw shot to fling yourself around this arena to get some stars. I mean, first of all, you play this to get upgrades for your quiver, but it also helps that aiming this time around feels perfect. If you remember in my Nintendo 64 Zelda videos, I went out and said that if you're not playing on an original N64 controller, then aiming is going to feel way too touchy. I didn't say anything about this in the Wind Waker video, seeing how I already complained a lot in that video, but the aiming in that game felt pretty sensitive too. But in Twilight Princess, the aiming feels tight, and I was able to land most of my shots with precision and confidence. Okay, so maybe saying that I 100%ed this game isn't entirely true. I did all the side quests and stuff, but I didn't play around with the fishing all that much. I remember when my sister and I were first playing this game, she loved fishing. She got all the fish logged in her journal and even caught the Hylian Loke. Like, I tried catching this thing, but you have to use a very specific lure that's really finicky. I think it's great that the fishing has been greatly fleshed out since Ocarina of Time. Like there's a number of fish they can catch and different lures that'll make catching certain fish easier. And depending on the type of season that the fishing hole is in, this can affect which type of fish shows up. It's a cool feature, and I'm glad it's here. It's just not my thing. So I've been pretty nice towards this game so far, but now I think it's a time to talk about something that I'm not exactly a huge fan of, and I also know that I'm not alone here. It's Link's transformation as the wolf. The main problem is that they don't really use this transformation so much, or rather, it doesn't feel like as if it's being used to its fullest potential. You can use this form to find scent trails and to find holes that lead to grottos. You have this really useful AoE attack, and you can jump on context-sensitive ledges. And that's about it. Link's wolf transformation isn't exactly great in combat, so when I had the ability to change between forms at will, I just stuck to the more combat-ready human form. There's two fixes off the top of my head that I could think of that would have made Link's transformation feel more worthwhile. The first and obvious one would be to give Wolf Link his own dedicated dungeon. Not like what they did in the HD version with the amiibo, but I mean like an actual dungeon that uses all of the wolf's abilities in creative ways. When you first play as the wolf in Hyrule Castle, you get a taste of what something like this could be like, but they should have stretched out that concept much further and made one dedicated dungeon for the wolf that put all of his skills to good use. The second and more fun idea, personally, would be to have multiple transformations similar to Majora's Mask. Like, there's already points in the game where you get to swim underwater in Lake Hylia, and there's this one part where you fly through a cavern, but why not be able to turn into like a weird Twilight bird or a Twilight fish, like that would have been really cool. I brought up combat a moment ago, and that's actually something that I do want to talk about. As a wolf, you'll find these Sheikah Stones that'll play a familiar melody, and if you howl at the right tune, then you'll be able to learn new combat skills. Two of these skills were context attacks from the Wind Waker, so it's nice to be able to use them at will here. Now, I'm not gonna lie, like some of these skills do feel pretty useless, like the jump slash, but when you're going up against enemies in the later dungeons, these skills will definitely come in handy. Speaking of the dungeons, I feel perfectly comfortable by saying that this lineup of dungeons and temples is easily, bar none, the best lineup that we've had in the series so far. I can't think of a single dungeon that's boring or annoying. Like, each one has their own unique set piece and means of exploration. I wouldn't say that these dungeons are ball-bustingly hard, but they each have their own creative puzzles and fun-to-use items. The first dungeon in particular stands out to me. It's a pretty simple dungeon, all things considered, but you have to free a set amount of monkeys that are being imprisoned, and as thanks for saving them, they'll help you reach parts of the dungeon that you couldn't previously. The iron boots in Ocarina of Time let you sink underwater, and in the Wind Waker, they made you so heavy that you could resist wind, but in Twilight Princess, you can use these to walk along magnetic surfaces. Is it slow? Yeah, but it's still a pretty cool idea, and in other parts of the Goron Mines, it leads to really cool set pieces. If I had to pick one dungeon that I cared for the least, it would probably be the Arbiter's Grounds. I mean, the first part of the dungeon is literally just the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time. Like, I thought that was pretty lame. But with that being said, you do get one of the most fun to use items in this series, the spinner. Now, sure, outside of the dungeon, it doesn't get much use, but when it's used inside the dungeon, look at him go! It also leads to one of my favorite bosses in the game, where you have to use the spinner to navigate around this wall of undead guards and to grind the boss's spine into literal dust. And the second phase was pretty intense, requiring precise timing to land your hits. But the best dungeon in the game, and one of my absolute favorites in the series, is the Snow Peak Ruins. Now, first of all, getting here was so much fun. You get to snowboard like it's Final Fantasy VII, and when you get to the dungeon, you might just think, it's just a ruined mansion, who cares? But a couple of Yetis live here. If you found this dungeon to be annoying, with all the backtracking and Yeta telling you where to go, I get it. But I love how there's an actual story going on here. Yeto found a piece of the Mirror of Twilight and brought it to his wife as a gift, but ever since then, Yeta has been feeling sick, and Yeto is trying to make a soup to make her feel better. So we go into the mansion to investigate, and Yeta points out where the key to the room that the Mirror of Twilight is in, but each time that we go to those spots, it's just ingredients to make a soup. Again, like, I can understand why people might not like this dungeon, but I think it's great. I've always been a sucker for lovey-dovey crap like what you see here. You know, it's charming. It's cute. Also, the ball and chain is an item that feels so damn good to use. Like, throwing this massive spike ball into destructible objects and just hearing them shatter will never not be satisfying. The boss of this dungeon exclusively requires the ball and chain, making it one of my personal favorite bosses in the entire series, and this theme is my absolute jam! I honestly don't care that most of these items aren't used outside of their dungeons all that much. Like, the dungeons are designed with these specific items in mind and makes great use of them. Plus, I mean, there are some secret areas that you're going to need these items for anyway, so they don't feel completely useless, and you still can use these things in combat. Like, using the ball and chain on a redead, for example, is like an instant kill. But you want to know what's great? In my Ocarina of Time video, I said that I felt the last dungeon, Ganon's Castle, wasn't all that fun. I actually felt it was pretty weak. And in the Wind Waker video, I said that I especially hated the last dungeon, Ganon's Tower, mostly thanks to the fact that there was a boss rush and there was like a maze and a staircase and like there was nothing else to it. In Majora's Mask, there's not really a final dungeon. Like, you go inside the moon, you solve a few transformation-related puzzles, you get the last few heart pieces, and that was that. But Hyrule Castle, the last dungeon in Twilight Princess, is everything I could ever want out of a final dungeon in a Zelda game. When you're outside of Hyrule Castle, there's no music that plays. You get bombarded with enemies time after time after time, and even have one last duel with King Boblin. Then when you go inside Hyrule Castle, you have a number of dark nuts waiting for you, and it makes sense seeing how you're breaking through the enemy's last line of defense. There's even a split in this dungeon where you can take one of two paths, one that leads to a puzzle, and then the other that leads to more dark nuts. They'll take you to the same place, but you get to choose what you want to do. Even the people that I talked about earlier on, like the ones I said don't really do much of anything, they actually contribute something here. You know, it's brief, but it is appreciated. Then you make one last push to Ganondorf and challenge him for the fate of Hyrule. There's a sense of finality to this dungeon, you know what I mean? Like, it feels like as if the entire game has been building up to this moment, and for the most part, it pays off. And I say for the most part because, and this is a problem that I have with all of the dungeons, and really, like, this leads to my biggest complaint with the game as a whole. Twilight Princess is one of the easiest games I have ever played. Most of these bosses put up no challenge whatsoever. I mean, look at these guys. They look so cool. Like, you're swimming around trying to take down this giant monster in the bottom of a lake, or you're flying around in the sky trying to take down this giant dragon. You go on its back, you stab it in the fucking crystal. It's so cool. But they pose no threat whatsoever. I didn't die once in this game, and I'm not saying that I need these bosses to be like Dark Souls level of difficult, but these guys are the definition of all style and no substance. Most of them follow the rule of 3. You expose their weak points 3 times in a row, you spam the jump slash, and then you win. Zant is a great example of one of the better bosses. It's like the greatest hits of the journey so far. His tactics change every time the scenery changes, so it's a fight that kept me on my toes. But the last boss, Ganondorf, that was a complete joke. Okay, so let's go over the entire fight before we get to Ganondorf. So first, he possesses a lifeless Zelda, and having to fight Zelda as one of the phases for the final boss, I think that's actually a really cool idea, but she only has 3 attacks and goes down really quick. Then there's the beast form, Ganon, who runs around and teleports around the room to try to catch you off guard. It's a fight between beasts, so you're going to need to transform back into a wolf. You flip him over, attack the flesh wound, boom, you're done. Next, we chase Ganondorf on horseback. Zelda takes aim with her light arrows to stun Ganondorf, and then we go in for the strike. Not great, but I do like what they're trying to do here. They're trying to take all of the mechanics that you've learned throughout the game, take all the significant parts of gameplay, and implement them into the final bosses. And then we have the Climactic Showdown, a one-on-one duel to the death. Ever since fans saw the Space World demo, people have been wanting this to be a reality, so having this be the final boss makes a lot of sense. But too bad it's the worst fight in the fucking game! Seriously, all he does, he charges at you, you clash swords, you mash the A button to stun him, and then from that point, you can just wail on him and he'll go down in no time. Like, talk about anticlimactic, seriously. The thing is, too, is that I don't usually play games for the difficulty. You know, I play them because they're fun and they are the best source of escapism that I can experience. But it is possible for a game to be too easy, and Twilight Princess, unfortunately, falls into this category. But at the end of the day, you know, I do share a lot of criticisms and gripes with a lot of the other naysayers of this game, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I love this game. You know, I was watching King K's video about Twilight Princess, and he made a point that really stuck with me. You know, Twilight Princess is a game that lets you duel with giant ogres on horseback, and you get to explore underwater and travel through time in different dimensions. You fight dragons and other gargantuan creatures, you know? Like, there aren't a lot of games, least of all Zelda games, where you can do these kind of things all in one package. Now, despite some things that weren't fleshed out all that well, Twilight Princess is a game that absolutely delivers. It's got almost everything I could have ever want out of a Zelda game and then some, and seeing how we're drifting further away from this kind of style, for better or for worse, it was refreshing to come back to this game. It's not like the Wind Waker where you could tell it was rushed. This game feels like a complete and satisfying ride, and I don't think I could ever get tired of it. This is my second favorite 3D Zelda game for a reason, people, and hopefully you now understand why I love this game so much. But that just begs the question, what about that game? Now, it might be a little while before that one because my current setup isn't exactly Wii friendly, so I have to figure out what I'm going to be doing with that. But believe it or not, you know, I've actually been looking forward to covering this next game ever since I started this retrospective. And it's a game that everyone has something to say about. I swear to God, it's like the Sonic Adventure 2 of the Zelda series, you know? Take that. You know, depending on how you feel about Sonic Adventure 2, that can be one of two completely different things. So until then, I will see you around.